Conference Committee report on House File number 5242, an act relating to state government appropriating money for supplemental budget for the Department of Transportation. The report is addressed to the Honorable Melissa Hortman, Speaker of the House, the Honorable Bobby Joe Champion, President of the Senate. We, the undersigned conferees for House File number 5242, report that we've agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report is signed by 4 out of the 5 members on the part of the House and 4 out of the 5 members on the part of the Senate. Hornstein moves that the report of the Conference Committee on House File number 5242 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Conference Committee.
I recognize the author, Representative Hornstein, who will explain the report.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I think what we'll do here is I'll talk about transportation, and we'll have Chair Nelson talk about the labor provisions, and Chair Howard will talk about housing. But before we get to that, we thanked all of our staff earlier when the bill was coming off the floor, but I really, in this moment of really needing to get these bills wrapped up, it's our nonpartisan staff that really are the heroes. And so once again, I want to thank Andy Lee from House Fiscal on the transportation side, and Matt Burris, also our nonpartisan researcher on transportation. So just to set the stage, members, we met a total of 5 times in committee. We met on Friday, May 10th, Monday, May 13th, Tuesday, May 14th, Wednesday, May 15th. We met twice, once in the morning and once in the afternoon. We had public testimony on Monday as well. We took public testimony both in person and written public testimony, and there was quite a bit of that. I'm also pleased that we were able to have some very productive meetings with our Republican counterparts on the committee and or staff, Republican staff, between every meeting. So we talked through some issues. We took some suggestions, others not, but we took some of the suggestions that the other side of the aisle had presented to us. And on the transportation side, 3 of those are quite significant. One had to do with the issue of these longer trains. That was a big issue here discussed on the House floor. That's no longer in the bill. There was some interest in adding language around corridors of commerce. So we have $15 million in corridors of commerce. That also came in from the Senate, but that was something I think that was important to both sides of the aisle, but that particular provision came to us through the Republican request. And finally, there's a cost-sharing provision related to curb cuts and ADA accessibility for bus rapid transit, arterial bus rapid transit, and we have a cost-sharing agreement on that. I think that was also important to both sides of the aisle. So there are a couple of provisions, major provisions that we took from the Senate that I wanted to alert the body of. One has to do with a very limited pilot project having to do with traffic safety cameras, and that will take place in the cities of Minneapolis and Mendota Heights. This is a much reduced version of this legislation when it was first introduced, but that came in as a Senate provision. Also, another Senate provision that came in that we took has to do with concerns about displacement along the blue line, and so there's a working group that's funded there. On the House side, there has been, of course, a lot of discussion about the greenhouse gas mitigation program when it comes to new road construction. Representative Kraft has championed that. Most of the House provisions remain in the bill. There are a couple of Senate ideas that we took around safety and a fund for mitigation. On the finance side, there's a very significant addition, and that is in the bonding bill, there was $22 million for State Patrol headquarters. That's now been moved into our bill. And another important finance provision is that a shared priority, I think, on both sides of the aisle has been funding the Small Cities program, and we upped that from $9 million to $11,350,000 for the year one-time appropriation. The small cities, of course, will be in the new transportation advancement account that we passed last year, and they will be benefiting from that. But there was a need to give them a one-time appropriation this year, and so coming out of conference, it's significantly higher, about 15% higher than before we left. So there's lots more, and I'm sure we're going to have some robust discussion, but those are the highlights. I also, again, a special thank you to Representative Petersburg, who and Mr. Marble, who we met with periodically during the conference committee process, and I appreciate their involvement and their input, and Vice Chair Tabke as well played a huge role in getting us to the finish line in this bill. So before I hand this over to my colleague, Representative Nelson, I believe Chair Nelson is on deck here. I want to thank all of the members of the conference committee. We did have Vice Chair Tabke, Vice Chair of the Transportation Committee, Chair Howard was on the conference committee, Chair Nelson and Lead Petersburg. And on the Senate side, I really want to thank our Senate colleagues. We worked very well together. Chair Dibble, Chair Port, Vice Chair Morrison, and Chair McGowan was there as well. So thank you, and we really appreciate McEwen. And thank you very much, and I will hand it over to my colleague, Chair Nelson.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. And again, I was the chair of the Labor Committee, and our bill that we passed, what got put into this isn't cast off the floor. I also want to start out by thanking the staff. Again, as Chair Hornstein said, without our staff here, we wouldn't get anything done. They're great, they work long hours, and they make us look a whole lot better than any of us really are. But with that, this bill, the labor portion of the bill, is approximately the same bill that we passed off the floor here with a few minor changes. In the PELRA updates that we had in the bill, the Senate had some minor changes to that were basically non-consequential, but it was able to get them on the vote on the bill that way. On the earned sick and save time, Chair Olson has been working hard on that for the last few years, and she works hand in hand with her Senate colleague over there, and most of those changes are being done over there, and we relied on them to get them right. The changes, that part of the bill, those changes were in full agreement with Chair Olson, whose bill that was. The broadband bill that we had in ours, we basically had two different broadband bills that were put into the bill, and the advocates were told to work on it, and if they didn't get their differences worked out, it wouldn't be in part of the final bill. Well, they may not have had come to peace in the Valley, but at least right now there's a truce in the Valley, and so the language that's in the bill came from the advocates that worked on this. The U of M PELRA piece was that we had taken out of our bill on the floor. The Senate insisted that be in there. There were some changes. When the bill was on when the language is in the bill on the floor of the House, the MnSCU was part of it. MnSCU was taken out of that bill. They're no longer in it. It's just the U of M and the language from the Senate bill, and that lowered the cost of that was there, which the Senate is still disputing and looking at and appealing that language there. And as we had in the discussion last night on the higher ed bill, a lot of talk about how the size of the administration at the U of M, I think it was 2.3, for every employee at the U of M, there's only 2.3 students. And there's a lot of talk about a bloated administration, bloated infrastructure there. So they should be able to absorb the 1 or 2 people extra they need if and when any of these public sector unions come about. And that's basically the changes that were in the bill. And with that, I'll pass it over to the housing section.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Howard.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I too will start with thank yous for our staff that helped get us to this point all through session. I want to start by thanking my CA, Jack Dockendorf, who was thrown into the fire here in the Housing Committee this session and has really helped be a steady hand all throughout the process. I want to thank our partisan researcher, Molly Peterson, for all of her tireless work, and our nonpartisan staff, Justin Cope, Katrina Highmark, and Mary Davis. I also want to thank Chair Port and Commissioner Ho and our Vice Chair Agbaje, a team that really worked together to come up with this final product. Members, as this bill, as it left, is a bill that focuses on housing stability, on preventing homelessness, on building more homes, on making sure that more Minnesotans have the opportunity to find that safe, affordable place called home. I will note some of the specific changes, although this bill is very similar to the one that left. We include a Representative Herr bill that provides financial support to low-income homeowners. We include a Representative Kraft bill to study the single staircase provisions that could help us unlock more affordable homes. And we also include the comp plan clarity bill, which originally was carried in the state gov bill. And I want to spend a minute or two on that because it's vitally important for all of our cities in the metro area. Members, we need to allow and promote cities that are showing vision for their community, to build communities that are going to create more homes, homes that our state desperately needs, homes that will help us combat climate change and improve our environment. But the lawsuit, in particular in Minneapolis, the 2040 plan has put that vision at risk, creating uncertainty not just for Minneapolis, but cities all across the metro area. It's harming communities, it's harming our environment. The courts recognized that the Minnesota legislature has the authority, and it's our role to exempt conduct from our environmental statutes when it's appropriate. And for comp plans, this is what makes the most practical sense. Comp plans are visionary documents and therefore are not appropriately subject to environmental review, including EIS and UARs or other forms of environmental review like it. So this language clarifies that it is the intent of this legislature to exempt metro area comp plans in cities of the first class that are currently authorized by the Met Council for MIRA. And what this will do is it will effectively end a protracted legal battle and ensure that Minneapolis can continue to implement its 2040 plan that is working to build more homes, especially the kinds of homes that Minnesotans want, homes that will improve communities and improve our environment. And this language also makes clear our intent that all cities in the metro area should not be subject to EIS or AURAs or the other kinds of environmental review that is more appropriate when individual projects move forward. And to be clear, this language makes clear that that kind of environmental review is important, and will take place. And lastly, I just want to thank all of the folks that have worked to find consensus on this legislation, housing organizations, environmental groups, cities. And I just want to comment on something I heard from one local government member early in this process, which is that they want to be hiring city planners to help build more homes. They don't want to be hiring more lawyers to defend against frivolous litigation. And so this is a pro-housing, pro-environment bill, and I'm so glad it's included. There are a few things that are not included in the conference committee report that left committee. We do not have the senior rent limits. We replaced that with a study on this issue, and thank Representative Stevenson for his leadership on that. We also do not include source of income discrimination, banning source of income discrimination. That is a disappointment. 6 years this House has passed that bill, and we're going to continue to keep working on it in the future. Members, this is a good bill that builds on our great work last year to make the dream of an affordable home a reality for more Minnesotans, and I encourage a yes vote.
I recognize the member from Waseca, Representative Petersburg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I believe we're still on the motion to concur. Is that correct?
That is correct, Representative Petersburg.
Thank you. And before we get rushing to decide that we want to concur with this, I do want to just bring up a few things that maybe should give us a little bit of pause. and we'll probably have more debate in the final debate. But some of the things that we talk about are some of the things that Chair Hornstein also talked about. Speed cameras. It's a 4-year study. There's a lot of them that could go into Minneapolis and Mendota. We're not sure that the study, if it's a study to determine their effectiveness or whatever they might be, whether or not we really need that many and for that long in order to determine whether or not they're effective. That's something that we'll debate a little bit later. Then there are a couple of things that are kind of really on my pet peeve, and especially in regards to transportation. One of them is we have struggled all 12 years that I've been here in the House on trying to get more money into the HUTD and the Trunk Highway Fund. And we're doing more and more siphoning off of those funds for various other programs when we've been trying to increase that funding because, as you know, most of the funding that gets there is from constitutionally dedicated funding mechanisms. And so one of them is $1 million to plant trees along the road. Even though the department already has in their budget some dollars for that, again, it's just another example of diverting money that we really should be using for road projects. The greenhouse gas pieces that we talked about, in general, the mitigation and what we need to do to try to mitigate that, I don't have as big a problem with, other than the fact that we don't allow for safety to be the primary concern for any project. If safety is the primary issue, then I think it should be able to prioritize over greenhouse gas. And again, in third reading, I'll be bringing that topic back up as well. In housing, one of the things that I don't think Chair Howard talked about was the fact that we have increased the credit card limit for FMHA for new homes to go from $5 billion to $9 billion, an 80% increase. And the question becomes, do we really want to put us on autopilot? We don't even have the inventory of houses, I don't think, in order to actually accomplish that. So that's again, a concern. As Representative Hansen talked about, the U of M unionization and the expansion of that program, philosophically, we have some issues with that, and I think that's something to be concerned with. And the final one that I'll just talk about is just in regards to broadband. Broadband is something that we really want to get sent out to the entire part of the state, and you heard that there was somewhat peace in the valley. Well, we're hearing from the two primary major contractors that are installing broadband and says, no, there is no peace in the valley. There are great concerns there. Now, certainly some rural electric associations and others have been contacted, and they're okay with it, but you got to remember, they're not the ones putting in broadband. And so that's another piece of concern that we have. So for those reasons, I think people ought to at least take pause, think about whether or not they want to concur at this time. Otherwise, we'll talk about these items again as we get into third reading. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Further discussion? There being no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion to adopt the conference committee report, say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The motion prevails, and the clerk will give its bill its third reading as amended by conference.
Third reading, House Law Number 5242, as amended by conference.
Third reading as amended by conference. Discussion. I recognize Representative West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Chair Hornstein, for bringing your final bill to the floor of your illustrious legislative career, and I don't say that with sarcasm. You will be missed when you're gone. And I appreciate the amendment that I got adopted in committee with Representative Cagle's oral amendment to get another $1 million for Highway 65. I know people are starting to get tired of that. I already know people are making plans to raid the money we don't spend, but Highway 65 is an absolute disaster in Blaine. It has been for years and years and years. Anything north of there, it's non-functional. But we've got a lot of money in the last few years, which Chair Hornstein has been generous enough to help us get into the bill. And it's going to help communities south of us as well, like in Representative Cagle's district, and what she so aptly named the 10 Tangle, which I will use repeatedly in the future, and I will always credit her with that wonderful name, which is where the Highway 10 interchange comes and hits Highway 65, and it's perpetual mess, and the $1 million in this bill helps us get started on fixing that. So Highway 65 is going to lose every single stoplight from 99th all the way up to 117th. It's 2.4 miles. That gets the same amount of traffic as Highway 35W in that same 2.4 mile stretch. So except there's 5 stoplights in that length. So it's great to see us continuing the momentum to fund Highway 65 as it goes south. And there's also another project that goes north. Other part of the bill, which Representative Petersburg already touched on, is, well, speed camera studies. And there's more speed cameras in our state. Well, speed cameras at all. I remember when Democrats were very, very active on the civil liberties issue and had a great revulsion at the idea of a camera enforcing the law. We should not be moving in that direction. That's what we have law enforcement for. We should make sure our law enforcement in every city is well funded like they are up in my community. So we can't turn it over to cameras when really we know the problem is a lack of law enforcement in particular communities in our state. We should be respecting them, not denigrating them. And we even have capricious and malicious prosecution on an officer, a state trooper, from the Hennepin County Attorney, and that's a big issue. We need to stop this kind of behavior, respect law enforcement, and not turn it over to cameras that have no discretion. We shouldn't be moving in that direction. And I miss the old Democrat Party that would also stand with me against these kinds of provisions. I know Representative Petersburg will walk through the majority of the bill, so I just wanted to highlight those 2 pieces that are very important. Another $1 million for Highway 65, and it's unfortunate that we are moving towards camera enforcement of our laws rather than respecting and funding law enforcement. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Douglas, Representative Franson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I am going to talk a little bit about the provision in the bill on the Minnesota Advisory Council on Infrastructure. I was hoping that issue was dead because it was not in the House provision. It was also not in the Senate provision, so I was hoping, praying that it was dead. Members, let me just talk a little bit about our committee. First off, it was a committee that met once a week, and still to this day really not sure why that committee existed, and I tried to disband it when we came back into session because it really wasn't doing anything. And then we met 3 times. We met 9 times, I think, last year, and then 3 times this legislative session. And out of the entire process, this is the result of that committee, is the Minnesota Advisory Council on Infrastructure. Representative Gilman served on the task force, so she'll go over that entire process there and the backstory there. But I'm kind of looking here, and we have on 2 fiscal notes here, and then it looks like we are absorbing costs for staff from the House Research Senate Council, as well as fiscal staffs in the newer fiscal note. So I'm wondering why we are having to have House Research Senate Council and fiscal staff absorb the cost for part of this infrastructure council. And I know that our staff is extremely busy, and I'm just kind of wondering why we are expecting them to almost work for free for the startup of this council. So members, if we can't afford to fund or hire staff, we really shouldn't be starting a new program if we have to say, hey, staff, sorry, it's coming out of your budget. So the major concerns there, let's see here. Looks like on the House Looks like we have 41,000 in, was it fiscal year 25, $475,000 in fiscal 26, another $471,000 in fiscal year 27. So almost $1 million total for 3 years of taxpayer money on an advisory council on infrastructure that we do not need. It's duplicative. We already have our agencies doing these things. So members, I'm going to request a no vote on that. This bill should have been thoroughly vetted on the House floor. It should have maybe gone through other committees. It certainly should not have shown up in the in the conference committee. So that's what I'm going to say, members. And then back to what Representative West was talking about, the red lights. Members, in 2013, this provision came up, the red lights, and it was a bipartisan effort to kill that bill in committee. It didn't make it to the floor. It didn't make it in any bills. It was dead. There was a lot of opposition to it, a lot of testimony against it, and the concern on civil rights. And so while I understand that you won't be taking pictures of the people driving the car, that also leads to other issues along the way. So let's say you borrow your car to your brother or sister, and it was your brother and sister that were driving, but you're being sent the ticket. The whole thing does not make sense, and it's just a really bad provision. It's a really bad road to start going down to it. And while it's a pilot project, members, we know that pilot projects never go away. They're going to expand. And if this is your idea of beefing up, helping law enforcement, perhaps you should look at the policies that make it very difficult for law enforcement to be here in the state of Minnesota. So members, I'm going to ask you to vote no, and I look forward to Representative Gilman discussing the infrastructure task force that she served on. Also, before I close, no, I can save that for another time. All right, thank you.
The member from Meeker, Representative Gilman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, members. I am very grateful for the opportunity that I got to have serving with Chair Cagle and then 2 Senate members as well, and then a whole bunch of stakeholders in the room for the task force. I got to learn a lot, and also grateful for staff for working with us to help me understand the process. I am a little concerned when we talk about the cost absorbed, and I'm just curious if the author of the bill would yield for a question. Maybe. I'm curious if Chair Cagle will yield for a question, please.
She will yield. Representative Gilman.
So when we did go through the fiscal note, and we did have some good, healthy debate in committee in regards to the cost of this new task force, I see that there's been some adjustments on the cost of employees, but there's also, when we talk about absorbing cost, if you could just expand on the fiscal note portion of that, please.
Representative Cagle.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Gilman, on the last page of the fiscal note, it says legislative staff may continue to track the work of the council and continue to absorb the costs since the council does not expire. So it's really about tracking what that council is doing after it's established and the legislative recommendations that might come out of it.
Representative Gilman.
Okay, thank you so much, Chair Cagle. I do see that they're anticipating that the cost would be like $1.5 million for House staff and $1.5 million for Senate staff. Is that correct?
Will you yield,
She would
Representative
yield.
Will you yield, Representative Cagle? Representative Cagle.
Yes, that's what it says. Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Gilman. Yep, that's what the fiscal note says.
Representative Gilman.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, I do believe that that's quite a bit of money to absorb. And as we were talking through things and looking at things, from the the cost of furniture and office space, things like that, and being in the committee, being in the task force, understanding the process, I kept asking the question over and over and over again because I was trying to understand what is the purpose of the task force of this council, if it were to be established. And I just want to let the body know that the council, the task force did approve the report, but not all members could even vote on it because of their affiliation with state agencies. So we had many members of the task force that were there for many meetings that had to walk out because they couldn't even vote on it. And it was alarming or a little concerning to me that they approved the report, but they did not, in fact, approve legislation to go forward with making the council here. So I just have one more question if the author would yield.
She will yield. Representative Gilman.
Great. So I'm just curious. We did establish this past year the new, oops, sorry, I keep muting myself. The new office in MMB for gathering the federal funds and working along with just stakeholders across the state to figure out how we can capture federal dollars. So how would this new task or this new council work and coincide with the office that's already there to do the work for Minnesota?
Representative Cagle.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And just to correct the record too on the fiscal note, that's written in thousands, not millions. So it's so the fiscal note is written in thousands. And then to your question about what would this do with the MMB office. So the MMB office, the infrastructure, the federal funds coordinator, that person is there to look for the money and figure out what kind of opportunities there are for the state to get IIJA funding. What this council would do, the main goals of this council is to collaborate, coordinate, and educate. And so the whole point of this committee, of this council, is to make sure that we're using the IIJA funds wisely, that we're being fiscally conservative with the funds that come into our state, so that when we're looking at large infrastructure projects that we know they're being built right, they're coordinating and collaborating with the different assets that are in that area, and that overall, when we do that collaboration, when we do that coordination, and then when we educate our locals and asset managers on how to maintain and how to operate those assets, it's going to save money in the long run.
Representative Gilman.
Thank you, Chair Cagle. One concern about that is just I want to ensure that the other piece that I kept bringing up is that this would not be a regulatory body, that we were not going to be growing government and growing more steps in the process for people like our builders, from unions to non-unions to folks across the state that want to come in, and if it's building more housing to working on our roads, bridges, any type of infrastructure. My hope would be that they would not have more loopholes to jump through. And so, again, if Rep. Cagle would yield for one more question, please.
She will yield. Representative Gilman.
Thank you so much. So will it be customary, or is it customary then for a council to propose legislation ideas for us for the following year? Like as they meet and they start getting their information, is it customary for them to bring forth legislation for us?
Representative Cagle.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Gilman, every task force I've been a part of does legislative recommendations. And that's just where they look at the pinch points and what the processes are making it more difficult for them to go forward with projects. And so what this council would do was the main purpose of it is to make sure that we're not duplicating, that we're not, through this work, I have gone and to each department, and every single one of the departments here in Minnesota has some sort of asset management tool. And so that makes me think, what kind of asset management duplication is happening? Not just within our public sector, but within our private sector. What is our private sector doing that the public sector could take advantage of, or what is the public sector doing that that we can work with the private sector. And so one other thing I did want to correct too is that it is actually going to be housed in admin now. And they do a lot of this work, you know, the sustainability, and I think it's their sustainability enterprise project or whatever. And they've been doing wonderful work, but what they've been doing is doing wonderful work for the state of Minnesota and internally for our state buildings, our state programs. And none of that has been expedited or presented out to the public on that asset management. And so, yeah, I hope that answers your question. I kind of forgot it going on my ramble.
Representative Gilman.
Thank you so much. So I remember us requesting right away that it would be housed in admin. And also, you know, just seeing it in the transportation bill, I was a little bit surprised by that because, again, I thought this would be something that would be under state gov. Do you believe that this is where it should be?
Representative Gilman, are you asking her to yield?
Please.
She will yield. Representative Cagle.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Actually, from the beginning, I remember the Republican members of the committee saying that they didn't want it housed in any department because they didn't want the governor to have any influence on the department. Well, but then that increased the fiscal note. So in response to the complaints about the fiscal note, I went back to see how we could adjust it. And so then that's where we determined that admin was the best place for it. And that dramatically reduced the original fiscal note. And I do believe that admin is the best place for it because they are the ones that are doing this work. And I do want to note that, you know, it explicitly states in the language that this is a non-regulatory body. And so this is absolutely non-regulatory. This is about education, collaboration, and coordination.
Representative Gilman.
Okay, thank you so much, Chair Cagle. I just want to go back really quick just to correct the record too. When we do look at the fiscal note, it is in the thousands, correct? But it says it is actually 3 million total. So it's page 16 of 16. It is 1.549 for the Senate, and then 545 in the House. So it is still, again, those are those absorbed costs, and that's what I'm curious about. We see other costs that are down, but this one is definitely absorbing quite a bit. So what I see that this is happening here for the folks in Minnesota is this is taking away money from roads and bridges and actually doing infrastructure work that it actually is more inflated than we thought. And so, and we're growing government. Small and mid-sized businesses cannot simply keep absorbing these state-imposed costs and these regulations that will come down through, I believe, growing government through, it could start as a task force, go to a council, great ideas around the table. But what I learned in that task force is that there's so many people that are doing the work, and that if it's simply needing to have more communication, if it's simply for them, if they were having troubles, but they even were wondering, what problem are we trying to solve here? And so I would just ask if Chair Cagle would yield on the fiscal note piece of that, please.
She will yield. Representative Cagle. Representative Gilman.
Thank you. So Chair Cagle, my question is do you see that it is right around that $3 million mark for the Senate and the House? Is that correct, or am I?
Representative Cagle.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Gilman. It's 3,000. These are in whole dollars. 3,000, not 3 million.
Representative Gilman.
Okay, this is so fascinating. Well, from our staff over here, we're looking at this a little bit differently. So I appreciate it. We're growing government here, and I can't imagine with the two bodies that with that many staff and council that it would actually only be $3,000 for both bodies, that would be the cost absorbed. So we double checked on it. We double checked on that, and that's what we've got there. So again, I so appreciate this time and this conversation. And again, the willingness to work on just the language of what the council would look like. But at this time, I'm going to have to definitely not support this going forward through transportation. I do want to end on a pleasant note, and I want to thank Chair Hornstein, Lead Petersburg, Tab Key over there. I just want to thank the folks that were on this this conference committee that were willing to just talk about lane splitting. I'm excited to see that it is in the bill. It's going to offer options for motorcycle riders like myself and others in this room. So thank you that was able to stay in there, and I'm excited that that's something that we could do bipartisanly, and appreciate that. Thank you.
The member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I scared Representative Newton off. He was going to be in the background there. Members, this Council on Infrastructure implementation it's a doozy. It's a doozy. They're going to have 3 employees at over $200,000 apiece. I just want to go over some of the, from the fiscal note on page 15, some of the expenses. Square footage at 28.75 per square foot, and I'm at the commercial cafe here, and it's got all the listings, a lot of listings for what office space is renting for in St. Paul right now. Here's 400 Robert Street, $16 a square foot. We've got University Center at 1919. That's $12.50 a square foot a year. Let's see if I can find, there's some more here. Hang with me. And if you want to get really cheap, go to Minneapolis, because it's really a fire sale down there. Here's one in St. Paul for $11 to $13 a square foot. But in here, it's Department of Admin is saying $28.75, almost double. It's more than double anything that I found on here. And I can't think for the life of me, with all the people working remotely now since COVID, that admin doesn't have some spare office space sitting around that they're paying for and nobody is occupying. So I find this number really out of line. Then they've got to build out the office space, hard-walled office, $30,000 to $100,000, modular office, $20,000. This is what I really love. The conference room, $80,000. $80,000 for the conference room. You're telling me there's no conference rooms anywhere in St. Paul to rent for under $80,000? They're already set up, folks. Then my favorite of all, $45,000 for a conference table. Folks, 2 places to look for conference tables and used furniture. The state office building, and we're clearing that place out. There's going to be a lot of stuff going into the dumpster or other places. Go over there, get what you want. Or come to my garage. We've got a used conference table that will at least fit the 15 people on this council around it. We've got one in our garage. I'm sure we got it for maybe $500 on Facebook Marketplace, but I'll sell it for the bargain basement price of $2,000. And then the chairs, plus assembly, $650 a chair. With delivery, $650 plus $29 for a total of $18,850 for the chairs around the $45,000 conference table. Members, what are we doing here? And I know, Representative Cagle, you said that this commission, how did you say it? We want to make sure we aren't duplicating. We already have government entities that do all this stuff. Our local governments do it. Our state government does it. This council is a duplication. Members, this is why the public doesn't trust us. Remember the $2,000 gold toilet seats or whatever it was back in the day, and how everybody made fun of all that at the federal level? This is just it on the state level. This is ridiculous. $45,000 for a conference table. Is it marble? Is it gold-plated? There's plenty of used furniture. Go find some. And I don't even know, Representative Cagle, would she yield to a question?
She will yield. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Cagle, how often will the council be meeting?
Representative Cagle.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I believe that, I would have to look in the language real quick, but I believe it's at least once a quarter. And I'm curious too about what fiscal note you're reading, if it's not the 4025-2E, because none of that stuff is in my fiscal note.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, maybe I have an old fiscal note. Mine's 4025-0. So evidently something maybe has changed, but I mean, so hopefully we're not setting up a new office then, because this is super expensive. This is super expensive, so I hope the bill changed, and I've just got an old fiscal note here, but I'm confused how the costs would have gone from one level down to what they are now. But the bottom line, folks, is we don't need another council, another government entity to do these things. We've got vast amounts of state and local and county and regional governments. I don't want to have, Met Council 2.0 starting here. So let's, just by virtue of this bill, not to mention the House File 4444 that's contained in this bill, this is an easy no. Thank you, members.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I have been looking at some different fiscal notes and also have a couple concerns that I'd like to raise about the effort to change the unions that are available at the University of Minnesota. So if Chair Nelson would yield to a question.
He will yield. Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Chair Nelson. So the two fiscal notes I have, and maybe they're not the correct ones, so let me just tell you, I'm looking at the one from April 25th and the one from May 14th. And the one from April 25th is going to cost, to do this changes at of collective bargaining at the University of Minnesota, is going to cost $7.1 million over the two cycles. And then the one that came out on May 14th, it's gone down to $1.6 million. And then the spreadsheet is zero, no money. So when you read the text of the fiscal note, one is 23 pages long and one is 12. All the main bullets explaining the costs for the U are the same, except in the new fiscal note where they're $6 million cheaper, it just sort of assumes away all the long-term costs. So I'm wondering if you could explain to me where that $6 million difference is and why nothing is showing up on the tracking sheet. Thank you.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And members, as I pointed out in my opening remarks, part of the reason was, and the biggest part of the fiscal note, if you look at it, MnSCU had a lot higher costs. That was the biggest part of the fiscal note. MnSCU system is out of it. It is now only the U of M. The other piece of that is some of the assumptions they're making based on past similar situations like this. Those costs never materialized, and the Senate is protesting or asking them to review that fiscal note because, as I said actually in committee, and I said this on the floor when we pulled it out of our bill, that I mentioned, I opined that we were probably going to get a fiscal note back that was going to be huge, that the U was going to try and kill the bill by fiscal note. And surprise, surprise, the fiscal note we got the day after we were in Ways and Means did that, which is the reason, because we didn't have time to deal with it, the reason we on the floor pulled it out. Now, as I also mentioned in my opening remarks here, yesterday we had a lot of discussion about on Chair Pawlowski's bill on the U of M, or the higher ed bill, I should say. It wasn't just the U of M. That there was a lot of talk at the U of M that for every employee that's at the U of M, there are only 2.3 students. And there was a lot of talk from your side of the aisle talking about the bloated administration at the U of M. In the fiscal note, I remember right there, they're projecting if all these units were to come about, that they'd need a few more employees. Well, if they have such a bloated infrastructure currently at the U of M, they should be able to absorb the cost. And when I brought this to Chair Pawlowski, he told us not to give them any money, and that's what we did, and that's what the Senate did.
Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members, and thank you, Chair Nelson, for that answer. I really appreciate it. I have been one of the people talking about excessive costs at the U, and I share that concern, but what really concerns me is this fiscal note, because the underlying, you mentioned that the changes for Min-State are gone because this program is no longer going to affect Min-State system, but the original fiscal note in April for Min-State was $4.7 million, and then it was not included in the new fiscal note. So that was separate from the costs I was talking about for the University of Minnesota. So that was addressed. What's left for us to look at, members, is that the fiscal note goes from $7.1 million to $1.6 million. And all the requirements of what they're planning for based on benchmarking by a lot of other Big Ten schools are the same. And the tracking sheet doesn't even show the $1.6 million. It says we're not spending any money on this. And the reality is, members, taxpayers are on the hook for things that happen at the University of Minnesota. They are already asking for a $45 million supplemental, which they were not given. They are already asking for looking at a tuition increase that all of our constituents are going to end up paying if they send their kids to the U. We cannot afford to create these rosy scenarios where all the requirements are the same and magically we lose $6 million of the cost and think that taxpayers are not ultimately going to be on the hook for this stuff. Members, this is ill-advised. There are unions at the University of Minnesota already, and if they would like to change that, then we need to have a much broader conversation about where the costs are, who's going to be paying for them, and ensure that taxpayers are not on the hook. We are already expecting the taxpayers to fund so much at the University of Minnesota. And then our constituents, when they send their kids there, are facing more tuition increases. And on top of that, I mean, we haven't even started talking about the medical center and what that's going to cost. Members, we literally cannot afford this. And my concern is that the original fiscal note was accurate, and then we came up with a rosy scenario to try to make the numbers work, and then we just magically wiped it all away when it actually came on the tracking sheet. But that's not what's going to happen to taxpayers. We are facing deficits in the out years, in the 26, 27 biennium, members. We should not be spending this money. So please vote no.
The member from Kenny Yohai, Representative Baker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm wondering if Representative Coltier would yield to a question, please.
Can you repeat which member?
I'm sorry, Coltier. Representative Coltier?
Coulter.
Coulter, thank you.
He will yield. Representative Baker.
Thank you, my apologies. Representative Coulter, you had a bill that's in this as well, House File 4994, regarding housing construction when it comes to some tax credits, and now you want to require prevailing wages on those units, on that project. I got a call earlier this session, from a number of economic development places in greater Minnesota. And I might have missed this because I thought I had some information that thought there was a switch. So my question to you, Representative, is is this prevailing wage inclusion now statewide, or was there a carve out or discussion about maybe greater Minnesota would not be included?
Representative Coulter.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Bakir. To clarify, the language in the bill applies only to LIHTC, the low-income housing tax credits. I am not aware of any conversations about any sort of regional changes or anything like that. I was not on the conference committee for this bill, so I couldn't speak to any conversations that happened outside of that. Thank you.
Representative Baker.
Thank you very much. And if the representative would continue to yield.
He will yield. Representative Baker.
I appreciate that. I had maybe heard some bad information, so, and maybe, Representative, what is driving this? I mean, I think you sound like, you are highly educated, you've got some housing background, you know this, but I know you understand in all of Minnesota, we have a housing crisis, we have a housing shortage. This bill of yours that's now included just made it a lot harder for the entire state, not just maybe what I thought was the metro region. Now it's all over. So the calls that I was receiving from our economic development folks that are begging for builders to come to our town, we've got this incentives, these tax credits, and to your bill here, you're rising and making these costs go up 10 to 15% because you are now asking for prevailing wages. I need to understand, if I could, Representative, what drove this cause or concern to you? Is there a reason why this is so important to you in this bill?
Representative Coulter.
Excuse me. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Baker. The reason that I pursued this legislation is that I had been hearing about and reading about reports regarding wage theft and worker exploitation and abuse on projects that had received, low-income housing tax credits. And over a series of conversations with a number of folks involved, the decision was made that this would be another way that we could ensure that the state had just a broader set of tools to address those particular issues. I also want to be extremely clear that we've heard this claim made before, and the reality is that anyone who claims with certainty that prevailing wage raises costs of construction, the data doesn't really back that up. The research really does not back that up. The overwhelming number of studies of both public and private projects that employ prevailing wage show that there is just little to no effect on the overall costs of construction.
Representative Baker.
Thank you. And Representative Coulter, you need to get in the car and go drive around some more around the state of Minnesota, because if you think that doesn't matter to the costs, go talk to the economic developers in greater Minnesota that are looking for developers, and when they see the line now that's going to change the prevailing wage on these already kind of thin projects to make it work, this extra 10 or 15%, there's a reason why they can't get anybody to come out there and build these for the new higher costs, because we don't get the income and the rent charges that we get in maybe the 7-county metro area. There's a real difference in economics, folks, around the state of Minnesota when it just comes to simply putting prevailing wage here and there. It doesn't matter. It does matter. I hear this all the time, that the suits in St. Paul and the folks that are pulling the strings around here just think it should happen magically across the state of Minnesota. This is a horrible part of this bill. It's killing our housing projects, especially in greater Minnesota. This was a really bad idea, and one of the first things that has to happen is there needs to be a carve out on this next year to show that there was some recognition that this is going to so much more damage greater Minnesota's housing expansion. This is a real problem, Representative. And again, I cannot state enough that this is a huge problem. We have building codes across the state of Minnesota. We have licensed contractors. It's not being built anything less or better than if it's a union worker or non-union contractor. It doesn't matter. We all build them. Nothing's falling over. I don't hear any concerns that our builders are building it differently because of who's building it. This is a really bad bill, and we need to get this fixed. This should not be part of this. And again, my overall comments on just the whole labor bill in general, again, here we are, we're throwing in House File 444 with the independent contractor in here. Not a good idea. The contractors, again, and businesses across the state are being hit once again. We've just got the sort of the revolving door with ESST and paid family medical leave with the tax coming, and there's just more mandates and more reasons to make it more expensive to try and do business in Minnesota, to build homes, to hire people, to encourage them to come to Minnesota. We have it backwards. We're doing everything we can to ruin business with this majority. I don't understand what your logic is. I wish that there would have been some conversations with Greater Minnesota and the folks that say, well, at least do that. I mean, it's different here in the metro. I get it. In fact, I don't think you can really build many of these 10 units or more without labor, union labor, which is fine. I think they're great workers. I think they do it great. But we don't have that easy to just pull up the wages because it kills it financially. So, members, this is a really bad idea with the labor part of this bill. We got to not support this today. We need to have this get fixed. This is actually going to really crush Greater Minnesota when it comes to more housing, because I know every one of our regional cities and the small communities around the regional cities are drying up because there's no place to live. This is a bad bill. Thank you.
The member from Morrison, Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And there are tons of provisions inside this bill that are very concerning. And some of them have been litigated on this floor before. We do have a lot of new language inside this bill, and some that, frankly, it would have only been heard within the confines of the conference committee. And within that conference committee, we got, like I said, new information. And yet, some of the information provided at the conference committee honestly created more uncertainty in the realm of broadband today. And I'm really concerned that, that there's going to be added costs and probably some challenges for us on implementation of the $652 million of federal dollars that are coming to Minnesota. And what is being done in this bill could hamper the rollout of that broadband. And that's the last thing that Minnesotans want to see. They want to see their broadband dollars that are sent from the federal government be implemented as quickly as possible using Minnesota workers who are safe on the job site. But this bill, I believe, is going to add burdens because we've heard from the folks who do this work already, and their concern here is that the language in this bill wasn't vetted for the purposes of understanding and ensuring that the dollars are going to be spent and implemented as quickly as possible. Instead, what we have here are these reporting requirements for the people who go about installing broadband. And these reporting requirements are on the businesses who do that. Reporting requirements over their workforce and labor, and the workforce requirements then have to be reported back to the state government. And in that, it's going to create more cost, and it's going to be more challenging to implement. In fact, I've heard that there are businesses who currently install broadband who might not even do the rollout of this broadband, given the concerns of these reporting requirements. That's frustrating because then there's an exemption for folks who do this, but they provide for less than 10,000 people. And frankly, those businesses are probably too small to be able to roll out $650 million worth of broadband investment. So I'm just very, very concerned with the result of the conference committee. I feel like this is new language that's going to add cost and potentially be wholly prohibitive to the rollout of the dollars that we need to see into our state. And frankly, I don't think that there was agreement found within a conference committee. And any agreement just appears to be amongst the left and the far left. I mean, this isn't agreement, and it's not signed off on by everybody. And I know that even Representative Petersburg, who sat on the conference committee, mentioned that, members. Then quickly to earn sick and safe time. On earn sick and safe time, there are some modifications to the bill and to the law that passed last year. This bill, from my first lens of reading it, what does it do? It helps public employers. You see some help and some assistance for schools. That's a positive thing. Glad to see it. Some positive steps in the realm of firefighters. I also think that's good. But for the most part, and I guess this is the encouraging part, is we will continue to have the chance to work on this in the future. But there really isn't much contained within the changes to earn sick and safe time that are going to benefit employers and to ensure that we have positive working relationships between employees and employers. And I really hope that as we move forward in a bipartisan fashion, that we can find the right path for earn sick and safe time. But I realize that the greater changes, which will foster a more positive working relationship in Minnesota, might have to come in future legislative sessions. Then next up, I just have to make at least a little bit of mention of worker misclassification, something that this body didn't have the chance to debate wholly on this floor just because of the way that the timeline worked. And I guess my biggest concern around the realm of worker misclassification is the amount of penalties that could be leveled against businesses in Minnesota, potentially threatening their livelihood, forcing more consolidation, forcing those within the building construction realms to be siloed within the realms of one major contractor rather than several small businesses, and small business owners being able to bring about their own ingenuity and creativity about the way that we go to work. And instead, what's going to happen is a lot of those small businesses or any business out there, if there's an infraction, across the board, multiple different lenses, whether it's through the reporting requirements to the Department of Labor and Industry, or whether it is because of some infraction brought against them, they could be fined for every single employee. They could be fined $10,000 per employee if there is some discrepancy in the system. So the penalties are extremely punitive in my estimation from my reading and understanding of the bill. And so I think that we're going to have to work for a future in Minnesota that's going to be more affordable and one that brings more certainty and humility to our Minnesota business owners and ensures that we're employing Minnesota workers in safe working environments that ensure that they are getting paid the great rate of pay that they can expect here in Minnesota. So with that, members, I will be voting no on this bill, and just appreciate all of the hard work that's been put into a very large omnibus bill.
The member from Washington, Representative Cha.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Although I don't sit on any of these committees, I just want to speak to the so-called lane splitting. On here it says a person may operate a motorcycle and overtake and pass another vehicle in the same direction of travel within the same traffic lane if the motorcycle is operated, 1, at no more than 25 miles per hour and no more than 50 miles per hour over the speed of the traffic in the relevant traffic lanes. I want to make it clear, because I know people are listening, that this doesn't allow you to overtake lane split at high speeds. And I support this provision because I really want people to understand that this provision is going to save lives in the motorcycle community. I've lost many friends due to rear-ending, especially when traffic comes to a stop at a light or during freeway travel. And so I want to thank Representative Gilman for working on this, and thank you for the friendship that we've created and the bonding over such it may seem little, but it is a big deal to those of us that put on our hats and get on our motorcycles. And so I appreciate that. And thank you to the chair and the committee for adopting and your flexibility and including this. Thank you.
The member from Ottertail, Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, the area that I had the most concern about the last couple of years with transportation and again in this year's bill, it really has to do with our greenhouse gas, requirements. And I continue to ask the question all the time. I said, one of the things that's stated is that we all know this to be true, and that's the conversation we start off with every time. And I continue to ask, what does it look like when we get there? Because I know we're talking about carbon, I know we're talking about climate change, and I know that there is change in climate. But how do we know, for Minnesota taxpayers, because we're looking at a lot of expense, how do we know what it looks like when we get there? And I never really have gotten to the bottom of that, and I wonder if Representative Hornstein would yield for a question.
He will yield. Representative Murphy.
So, giving that point, and given carbon levels, can you give Minnesotans an idea of what the goal looks like with regard to climate change in reference to carbon levels?
Representative Hornstein.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thanks, Representative Murphy, and thanks for being a great member of our committee. We've appreciated working with you. A couple ways I would answer that question. Well, first of all, transportation is the #1 source of greenhouse gas emissions in the state of Minnesota and increasingly globally. So that's why we have a strong position in this bill and in last year's bill. And it's not just the provisions from Representative Kraft. There's other ways in the transportation sector that we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So that's #1. #2 is that there are numerical goals in Minnesota statute for greenhouse gas reduction. I don't have those at my fingertips, but I'm sure Representative Kraft can give those to you. But we have numerical goals that we have fallen far short of reaching. And if you're just looking, you just don't need to look around. There's story after story in the papers about the accelerating rate of climate change. Look at our winter that we just had or didn't have. The evidence is overwhelming. I know you cite alternative evidence, but 99% of the scientists are saying that this is real, this is here, this is accelerating, and it's going to have such detrimental impacts on our economy and so many aspects of our life. So we pay attention to it in the transportation bill because it's the #1 source of greenhouse gas emissions.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Hornstein. I really appreciate working with you, too. You're just a very nice man, and we've had some great conversations. I just want to be right on this, because we're looking at a lot of expense. Some of the things we talked about this year, and you start to pencil it out, and this is going to be a huge agenda change for Minnesota. It's going to be a huge cost. And the bottom line is, after we're all done, yeah, we have changed a little bit, but we're not talking about emissions. I think it's great that we're looking at changing something with emissions, but what we're doing with this is statewide. And we still need to have the goal of what it looks like when we get there. Otherwise, just emission goals and reducing emission, that's more pollution evidenced. The history is, since 1980, for 40-some years, we've been talking about this. And nothing's really changed. And we have changed it over time. There is differences. 500 years ago in Antarctica, they've done ice cores. In there, we were warmer 500 years ago. Were we around helping? No, we weren't. So the emergency isn't there. Now, in the Senate bill that brought to the committee versus the House bill, their bill was a little more heavy on some public safety issues. And I wondered if Representative Hornstein would yield for a question.
He will yield. Representative Murphy.
Representative Hornstein, can you just give us an idea what was the conversation like with regard to greenhouse gases in response to the public safety choices that were made by the Senate?
Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Murphy, I'll briefly answer that, but I think that Representative Kraft would be a good source of information there as well. But to your question, the conversation really was around the fact that safety and greenhouse gas reduction is not mutually exclusive. And in fact, one can enhance safety as well as reduce greenhouse gas emissions and enhance mobility. So one example I want to give you quickly is some conversation took place around Highway 55. So we have environmental review, environmental mitigation issues around Highway 55 in northwest Hennepin County. Highway 55 is, a classic example of a road that needs improvements. And so we're going to be aiding that process in this bill. But it's also a road that is ripe for, more frequent bus service and bus service that doesn't exist on that road. And so you can do both. And of course, you're much less likely to get hurt or injured in a well-designed road or a transit facility. So those are some of the issues that we did have a very specific conversation, myself and Senator Limmer, about that particular piece of infrastructure.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Hornstein. I appreciate the extra explanation on that. We know that because of the efforts we had in the House, some of our efforts trumped what was coming from the Senate. And we have really strong presence with regard to climate change in the House. It was a very strong message from our Transportation Committee. My last question I'd like you to yield on is a question that I had about our own, for Representative Hornstein, please.
He will yield. Representative Murphy.
In our Transportation Committee, we had our own advisory committee that was put together. And I mentioned that I'm part of the Rare Disease Council. And in the Rare Disease Council, they have representatives and senators that help represent the interest of the people. So we're elected. With this advisory committee, there are no elected people. And I just want to have on the record why you think it wouldn't be helpful or important for the voice of Minnesotans to be represented on an advisory committee when there's easily going to be lots of dollars spent on anything that comes out of there.
Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Murphy, I believe you're referring to the Technical Advisory Committee as it relates to the greenhouse gas provisions in the bill. I just want to make sure that's what you're referring to.
Representative Murphy.
You said an advisory committee in our committee. I didn't quite understand, so I just want to make sure I'm hearing you.
Yeah, and
Representative Murphy.
Yeah, there were two different outlets. There was the the Technical Advisory Committee, and there was another group that was the workforce group. But there's no representation on either one of those for elected people, all appointed.
Representative Hornstein.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Representative Murphy, I would feel a little more comfortable if Representative Kraft answered that. Those provisions are in his bill. So if it's okay for him to yield to you, that would be my preference.
Representative Murphy.
Yes, that'd be fine if Representative Kraft helped.
He will yield. Representative Kraft.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Murphy. So last year's bill that we passed created an impact mitigation working group. In the bill, we defined who is to be on that group, and they were to look at the implementation of this policy. They came back with a set of recommendations that was part of the bill we passed last year that was due to us just before session began. Those recommendations is what formed the basis for the bill that I presented and is now in the transportation bill. What you're talking about is a technical advisory commission or advisory group, and this is requested by that working group, and it's a very technical group to advise on things like mitigation options and the technical implementation of the law. So the folks that are on that committee is a recommendation by MnDOT as well as circulated with that impact mitigation working group, and there really isn't given its focus, it's not an appropriate place for an elected official. I will also say that state's goals are net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. That's what our goals are. And that was in statute, and it originally was a goal that was a little bit less aggressive than that, but that was created in 2007 with the bipartisan Next Generation Energy Act.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Representative Kraft. Thank you, Madam Speaker. That kind of goes to my point. We set these guidelines for the state of Minnesota, and I'm just looking for answers to what it's going to cost. And I just think if you're going to have advisory people anywhere in both of those groups, why you wouldn't include elected people and only include appointed people. We saw from the Minnesota flag that 13 appointed people can trump the voices of over 6 million people. This is going to be really expensive for Minnesota, especially for rural Minnesota. And I think it's going to be really important that we actually itemize and show people what they can expect when we get there. So thank you, Madam Speaker, and I would vote no on this. Appreciate it.
The member for Sherburne, Representative Lawrence.
Madam Speaker, thank you, members. I want to speak at a couple spots of this bill that we have before us here. And one part is the housing, one part is the worker misclassification portion that are both in this bill here. We've heard testimony this day on housing and how there's a portion of this bill that is going to increase housing and the opportunity for Minnesotans to have housing available to them. We know that we're in a housing deficit, that there's not enough livable space out there for the residents of Minnesota. It's been mentioned it's a crisis that we're in at this point in time. I don't know if that's the right word or not, but it's a necessity. And this bill has been testified today that this will help in our housing and provide housing. In the very same bill we have here, we talk about worker misclassification. And as I listened to the testimony, as I heard commentary on the things that are here, I look and I say, how in the world can we have a bill that, one, is supposed to help housing, and in the next turn of the page, it attacks the individuals that make housing possible. It attacks individuals that plumb, that put the electricity in, that do the landscaping, that put the windows in, that do the construction, the cement work, the asphalt, build the roadways, all the entities that go into an entire development, construction. This bill turns around and says, we need more housing, we want more housing, we want to do policy that creates the encouragement of more housing, and yet we say to the ones that perform the work, we're going to hinder you in the process. We're going to attack you as you go down. I don't know how many of you had a chance to really look at parts of this bill here, but in the last few days, and I don't think any one of us can argue, there's been numerous testimony of it, and kind of I'm going to say on both sides today of this week that the cost of doing business in Minnesota has increased. And I just think that's a true statement. There's no question. We visit with any businesses. Cost of doing business in our state has increased. And it's been testified many times. We're to blame for some of that. I don't think we're going to take the blame for all of it. But we do have a great effect on increasing the cost of doing business in our state. And in fact, just the other day, we passed the paid family leave, medical leave. 20 weeks of time off. We're going to tax the employers a portion of it. We're going to tax employees a portion of it, which, as I hear from constituents, many of them are very surprised that they're paying for the leave, but that's the way it's written. That's the way it is. It's a tax that we've increased those costs, those individuals. In this bill here right now, we've got another increase or potential. If it's not going to increase because of what I'm going to read here in a few minutes, it is going to increase because of the costs that it's going to do business. That the additional business or staffing and checks and lawyers to help protect the business, it's going to cost more to do business in the state of Minnesota because of the bill we have before us. One thing this bill does is it does empower the commissioner to shut down an entire business at possibly all locations based on one single violation. Okay? The commissioner has the authority to shut down an entire business based on one violation. Do we know that's in here? Do we understand what we're doing? When we talk about businesses that may misclassify employees, okay? I don't know of businesses that are intentionally doing that. I think most of our businesses in the state of Minnesota want to do well. They want to treat their employees well. They want to be profitable. They want to be effective in their communities. But we've got this in here, okay? Misclassification of employees. And I'm going to read a lot of this, and I apologize for that, but I think it's essential. It was touched on a little bit by Representative Schultz, but I think it's essential to say if a business is accused of misclassifying employees according to our rules, right? The following damages and penalties may be imposed for a violation of this section, right? Okay. Compensatory damages include, but not limited to, okay, this is part of the penalty, not limited to the value of the supplemental pay including minimum wage, overtime, shift differentials, vacation pay, sick pay, other forms of paid time off, health insurance, life and disability insurance, retirement plans, saving plans, and this one gets me, and any other form of benefit. Employer contribution to unemployment insurance, Social Security, and Medicare, and any costs and expenses incurred by the individual resulting from the person's failure to classify. There's a penalty right in itself, and we don't even know what that one costs. As an employer, there's no idea what that may or may not cost. A penalty of $10,000 for each individual. $10,000 for each individual that may have been misclassified. A penalty of up to $10,000 for each violation in subdivision 1. There's several parts of subdivision 1 that could have a violation. A penalty of $1,000 for each person who delays, obstructs, or otherwise fails to cooperate with the commissioner's investigation. $1,000 for each person that might be involved in the process. The dollars that this costs a business, not only the investment to make sure that they're in compliance, which most businesses strive and try to be in compliance, but if there's something that all of a sudden our commissioner says, hey, we caught you out of compliance, there was no clue that they were even out of compliance. I've been in that position, no idea, following the law the way I read it, following the law as we understood it, following federal law, going along, and all of a sudden, what do you mean we're not in compliance? Okay, what do we have to do, right? What do we have to do to get back in compliance? And then you come into, and I think this is a big one, because each of us have independent contractors in our district. We not only have businesses, but there's no question that every single one of our districts have independent contractors in them that work within our districts, that work out of each of our districts, that pay taxes, that employ people, independent contractors. And this is surprising. And I don't know if anybody's read this section or not, but here's the definition: independent contractor. This is it. You are qualified as an independent contractor only if the individual is operating as a business entity that meets all of this list, all of the following requirements at the time of services were provided or performed. Now, it's not one list, it's not two, it's not three, it's not. In fact, there was 9, they're deleted, and they had a couple sub. It was increased to 14 points, and of those 14 points, there's 3-4 of them that have sub points to them as well. Now, I'm not saying these things are bad. I'm just saying these are a lot of requirements that we're taking and placing on our businesses, especially our independent contractors who provide a major service to our areas, to our districts, who are going to be the ones that help increase the amount of housing in our districts, in our cities. These are the guys and the individuals and the women that are going to be part of that working crew that helps make this happen. And we're creating legislation today. Doesn't make it easier for them, doesn't help them in the process, doesn't come alongside them in this process, but punishes them. We've talked about criminal punishment before. I'm right back there. Almost makes them like a criminal in a process here that they're trying to do their very best. Now, I know there's bad actors out there. I don't think there's any question that in every industry we do have bad actors. But for the most part, these are individuals that are part of our communities, that are involved in our communities, that are part of trying to make a better community for each one of us to be a part of. In addition to those 14, which is on page 184, in addition to those 14, there's a whole nother section. And I'm not going to go through and read it. I wanted to, but I'm not going to. There's a whole nother section, prohibited activities related to an independent contractor status. So not only do they have to figure out how do I meet the 14 criteria with all the sub-criteria, but now there's a whole nother section, okay, what are the activities I don't dare get into? And let's be honest, as independent contractors, let's be honest, not all of us understand all the language we look at every day, right? As we see bills before us, and we need help with that. So we got staff to help decipher what does it mean, help me understand the repercussions, help us understand what we're doing here. But as we look at this, we're asking them to hire additional staff or a lawyer, or help them to figure out, are they in compliance? What can I do as an independent contractor? What can't I do? Because let's be honest, their main goal is to do what they're good at mostly. They've worked in a trade for their whole life. They maybe were an apprentice, worked up to a journeyman, and then became possibly self-employed or a master of whatever their trade is, and they love their trade. This may not be their cup of tea necessarily. And we're putting another weight on our businesses. We're putting another weight on our independent contractors. And so, one, I'm not a big favor of having a piece of legislation thrown into all the other legislation here together. Thank you, Madam Speaker. But I do think it's important that we understand and we take a good look at what we are putting on as a burden to our businesses that we expect to have performing things within our communities. And I look at this as being over excessive. I look at it as being challenging and difficult. Are parts of these necessary? Absolutely. Are 14 of them necessary to be an independent contractor that somebody needs to meet? I'm not exactly sure they are. And so I would encourage, as a body, that we vote no, that we relook at this legislation, that we figure out a way to come alongside our businesses, our independent contractors, and empower them, help them to be innovative, to do what they're good at. And that's providing the services, the goods to our communities, to our residents, and working together in communities to make them a better place. So I encourage a no vote on this bill because of this part that's in here. Madam Speaker, thank you.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I rise to talk about this great labor bill and to finally talk about worker misclassification, which we were, as Representative Nash had said, I have been talking about all session and look forward to talking about. What I want to say about this labor bill and Chair Nelson, which I think he took a similar approach to the first labor chair that I had, Chair Eklund, who said the job in the Labor Committee is to listen to workers. The job in the Labor Committee is to understand what workers need and to do the work to ensure that Minnesota has a workforce and that Minnesota has, that jobs are safe, that people make a family-sustaining wage, and that we are looking out for workers. And that's what we did. And I will tell you, having been working on this issue for quite a while, misclassification fraud, the more and more we talked and listened to workers, the more and more we saw workers who are working without the security of unemployment insurance and overtime pay, workers who are working paying the cost of doing business, as Representative Lawrence talked about, instead of the companies that are actually making the profit. The more and more we heard from small businesses that are trying to play by the rules but are competing with low-road folks who are not and just can't make it pencil out. We heard stories like Jose Rosales, who talked about being on a construction site where he was misclassified but didn't know it, and fell off a roof of a two-story building, and after 5 days in the hospital, had someone from a labor broker, someone from his work, come and tell him they were mistaken. He didn't have workers' compensation, but it wasn't covered by insurance, but he advised me to change my name and my address and said eventually the hospital bills will disappear if nobody paid them. This is the kind of stuff that's happening to workers in all of our districts. People are being left without a social safety net. People are being left without the whole compact that if you work, if you are part of our economy, that you will not have to go bankrupt because you fell off a roof. You won't have to go bankrupt because you lost your job through no fault of your own. And you certainly will get the wages that you have made and the minimum wages and overtime pay. And if you look at the data, as we've been looking at, if anybody read the OLA report in 2024, this is a business model. This isn't a few bad actors. This is a business model because when you look at it and when you talk to people, it actually doesn't make sense to follow the law given how currently misclassification works, because it's just you're competing against folks who are not. 22% of employers misclassify, have at least misclassified one workers. Construction workers are losing $17,000 a year on average in wage and benefits when they are misclassified. The cost of doing business should be on the company making the profit, not the worker who is there doing the work. And so when I think about the work we've done to get to this bill, 9 months of a task force, of the Attorney General's task force with folks from business, folks from unions, folks from worker groups, experts, 2 legislators. I think about this bill and what came out of it as the foundation of what we need to do to ensure that workers, that we uphold the bargain, that if you work hard, you will have the protections that we have put into law. This is an economy-wide problem. This is not just about construction. This is about across our economy. And if you have been in the back of a house at a restaurant recently, if you have, doesn't matter where you've been, white collar, blue collar, this is a problem. And this bill brings the tools to investigate and enforce that our agencies have already. It brings them together to use them more effectively. It strengthens those tools. And yes, it does provide stronger penalties. Because if you read the OLA report, what it said is the penalties are not deterring this kind of action. If you read the OLA report, it basically says if you get caught misclassifying, maybe you have to pay back some of the things that you already should have been paying, which is basically like an interest-free loan. So what this bill does is say, we are going to ensure that there is the tools to deter, to comply. There's resources that we're giving DLI to ensure that we're educating folks, and the task force continues, and I think our next topic will be on education as we talk to our small businesses, and our workers. But I will just close by saying, at the end of the day, when we talk about this, we need to center the experience of the workers in every one of our districts. Those are the folks who are fueling our economy. Those are the people who are ensuring that our food is served, our houses are built, our lawns are mowed, or whatever, wherever in our economy people are doing work. So I am really grateful to Chair Nelson for centering the voices of workers and ensuring that we have a really good labor bill. And I look forward to passing this bill today and really the work we can do on misclassification fraud, and know that this work is not done. So thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd ask for a yes vote.
Point of parliamentary inquiry.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, how many, how many messages have we sent to the Senate today? And then secondly, is the Senate in session right now?
Representative Scott, so your first question, we sent 4 messages to the Senate, and the Senate is still currently in recess. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
All right, I recognize back to discussion, I recognize the member from right, Representative McDonald.
Madam Speaker, fortunately, what I was going to say is the lead of the labor industry on those proportions were already said by my colleagues. But I think I could say it better and longer. So let me begin. You know, members, I'm going to just say this. After 14 years, it is good that we have some humor and laugh together as a body. It's good and righteous that we have good debate, that we have disagreements and agreements. But I have witnessed over probably 4 years that we don't laugh as much as often. And humor is a gift from God, and we need it to get through this mess. These are hard days for all of us. These are hard bills to discuss, especially if you're in the minority. Thanks be to God, it's very hard. But it's good that we laugh once in a while. At the end of the day, we're all human, and we all care about each other. We want to make sure that we get home safely to our families. So, just in closing, the laughter that we had here, just few, is very good. It's warming the soul, it's good for debate, and it's good for each and every one of us. With that, vote no on this bill.
The member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd actually said I wasn't going to speak on this bill, and then I learned some things. So here we are. Late breaking. Actually, I just found out about a provision from just this morning that got dropped in, and I thought, ooh, we better have a conversation about that, and I've got some questions about it. So was it last week when the elections bill passed? I forget. But the elections bill passed off the floor, and there was some language that I spent some time on in that elections bill regarding folks who need to register as lobbyists when they are lobbying their local governments. And in that provision, Democrats created a sort of a two-tiered system for folks. More free speech for some than for others. And what that means is that if a person has discussions with their local elected officials, things like providing information, professional opinions, direction on a topic, etc., they can only do so up to a threshold of $3,000 worth of advice, for lack of a better word. Now, someone who is a highly paid professional is going to hit that threshold a lot more quickly than someone who is a lower wage worker, which means that we set up a system where there is more free speech for some than for others. That's the system that was set up. Now, as part of that, there's a study is really what ended up in that bill. But in addition to that study, folks in the metro, people lobbying their metro governments, still have to comply with this during the study. So they have to register as lobbyists if they provide $3,000 worth of time, advice, information. Folks outside of the metro area do not have to comply with this measure until after the study is completed, and then presumably decisions will be made about how to move forward. Would Representative Howard yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Howard, this morning you added an amendment to the bill on contingency fee payments. Very, very short. I'll read it. Notwithstanding any law to the contrary, an attorney or financial advisor participating in conduit financing through a local unit of government may be paid on a contingency fee basis. Now, I assume you guys caught the problem because lobbyists are not allowed to be paid on a contingency fee basis. However, these are the exact folks who would be forced to register as lobbyists under the new law. So this is providing an exception to this new elections law. So my question, Representative Howard, is, in this language, in Section 52, lines 283.21 to 283.23, is the effect of this that some lobbyists can take contingency fees? Or is the effect of this that this particular group of people gets to be exempted from being lobbyists based on how they get paid?
Representative Howard.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative New Brindley.
This was an issue brought to us by housing developers about conduit financing, which is a specific tool that housing developers utilize, in which local governments will submit on behalf of a developer for a particular amount of funding, but it's the developer themselves doing a lot of the work to move the project forward. And so this particular language allows for that type of financing and structure that is working well to continue. I would note that the effective date for this provision would expire next year to allow time, I believe, for that study that you mentioned to take place.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would Representative Howard continue to yield?
He will yield. Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm going to repeat my question because I appreciate why it was done, and I understand that there are housing developers who take advantage of this conduit financing, and more importantly, the reason that this is necessary is that they are paid on a contingency fee. That's the piece that's important. That's why you need this provision in here, is because of how they are paid. That's why you need this in here, because they're paid on a contingency fee. So my question is the result of this new language that some lobbyists can take a contingency fee, or is the result of this language that this group is being exempted from registering as lobbyists?
Representative Howard.
Madam Speaker, Representative Brindley, it's not clear that these people are lobbyists, but we wanted to protect this type of financing. So this doesn't really impact the lobbying law.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would Representative Howard continue to yield?
He will yield. Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Howard, then can you tell me exactly why this needs to be in here? You said in the, I actually watched the hearing from this morning, and you said that it was because of the elections bill. So can you let me know why this was necessary if these people are not lobbyists?
Representative Howard.
Madam Speaker, Representative Brindley, it is an issue that we just wanted to be clear or provide a little comfort language. So that's the nature of it.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would Representative Howard continue to yield?
He will yield. Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Howard, can you, I feel like I'm not getting an answer. Why do we need comfort language? Why do we need comfort language? Are they lobbyists or are they not lobbyists? Should they be registering or shouldn't they be registering? Why do we need this exception?
Representative Howard.
Madam Speaker, Representative New Brindley, again, I'll reiterate, this it is not exactly clear. We don't believe that they would be considered lobbyists, but we know this study is happening over the course of a year. We've sunsetted it in a year, and so that's the nature of this.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And thank you, Representative Howard. I appreciate you being willing to answer a series of questions. It will come as no surprise to anyone that now I'm going to give my opinion on the issue. I think under this law, these are folks that would have to register as lobbyists, which is exactly why the Democrats dropped this into this bill this morning, this housing bill this morning. They realized that we have a group of subject matter experts who work in housing who are paid on a contingency fee basis. And the problem is, it's already an existing statute. Lobbyists are not allowed to be paid on a contingency fee basis, meaning that a lobbyist cannot work on an issue and only be paid if they achieve a certain result, right? They don't get to make their fee contingent upon something else. However, attorneys and financial advisors working on these housing issues in a city and working specifically on this conduit financing, which is financing that brings together money from multiple sources, working with a local unit of government, which is what this lobbying law applies to, these folks can be paid on a contingency fee. So here's the deal, and here's the problem that Democrats have run into. These people absolutely should have to register as lobbyists under their law. And already they have realized, uh-oh, this isn't going to work for everyone. So we have now created another situation. So we have a tier where if you make a pretty high hourly wage, you don't get very much free speech. You have to register as a lobbyist pretty quickly. You're going to hit that threshold fast. However, if you are a lower wage worker, you're going to get quite a bit more free speech. You get to engage in a lot of free speech before you hit that threshold and have to register as a lobbyist. Now we're carving out a third group of people. Only this one is interesting because I suspect actually that these attorneys and financial advisors are reasonably well paid. That's my guess, is that they are actually probably higher paid and would hit that $3,000 threshold pretty quickly and would have to register as lobbyists. But now we're exempting them. We are saying that, ooh, this might be a problem for this thing that we really want to get done. So we're going to exempt them so they don't have to follow these rules. I mean, I guess the only hopeful thing about this is that perhaps we are already seeing the very problematic language that the Democrats passed just last week. We are already seeing how problematic that language was. That might be the one good thing about this, because I don't know why in the world we would choose to exempt one small group of very well-paid individuals from having to follow this law. But because they are paid on a contingency fee, and we really care about this thing, well, we're going to let them skate by. We're going to let them skate by. We're not going to make them comply with this law because we like what they do. But we really hate what these other well-paid people do, so we're still going to make them comply. We're still going to make them comply because we don't like how they lobby. We don't like the things they say to their local officials. So they have to register as lobbyists. But these folks, we like what they do. So we're going to exempt them. This is hugely hypocritical. We've already set up a two-tiered system where some people get more free speech than others, and now we're going to start carving out the people that we like, the people that we think are important. We're going to just start carving them out. Where does this end? Where does this end? I mean, I guess thankfully you did figure out already that the language you passed week is such a problem, so you could at least make sure that that housing can be built and that housing can go forward. I guess maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. But it's sure a problem to just start carving people out. That's a real slippery slope. Because now we're not just saying that if you make a lot of money, you get a little free speech. And if you make a little money, you get more free speech. Now we're also saying if we like your speech, we're going to carve you out entirely. That's what this is. We like your speech, so we're going to carve you out entirely. But you folks who we don't like your speech, you still have to comply. You still have to comply. I hope folks see the problem with this. My goodness, I hope you can see the problem with this. Again, I go back to Animal Farm. Some are more equal than others. It's good to be one of the pigs living in the house. It's good to be one of the pigs living in the house. Because if Democrats like your speech, they will carve you out and give you lots of it. You can have it. You can have all this free speech you want. But if they don't like your speech, and you make too much money for them, they're going to limit that. They're going to make sure that you have to register as a lobbyist. That's what they're going to do here. That is the effect of this language. That's the effect of this language. I would love to be wrong, but I'm not. I would love to be wrong, but I'm just not, folks. This is bad. This is bad. And slipped in two little lines and one extra word. That's all it is. That's all it is in this monstrosity 288-page bill. 3 little lines, carving out the people we like to have all the free speech they want. If I had any question about this bill before, I'm certainly voting no on it now. I am certainly voting no on it now. And I hope the rest of you will think about this, because this goes beyond housing. This goes well beyond. It goes beyond lobbying. It goes beyond housing. That's not what this is about. This is much bigger than that. This issue is much bigger than that. This issue is about our freedom of speech. This issue is about the fact that people have a right to interact with their government. People have a right, individual citizens have a right to interact with their government. But Democrats want to say that no, you only have limited right to interact with your government. But if you talk to your government too much, then you have to register as a lobbyist. What do you think that does for individual citizens who just care about issues in their communities? What chilling effect does that have on the average citizen who just cares about what's going on in their community? When Democrats tell them, you only get to talk to your elected officials a little bit. But as soon as you cross our threshold, you don't get to talk to your elected officials anymore. Now you have to register as a lobbyist, which means that you also have to follow all the lobbyist rules. You have to file all the lobbyist filings, which frankly, for an average citizen, that's going to be pretty intimidating. It's going to be pretty intimidating, and they are not likely to play that game. They will choose to stop talking to their elected officials. That's the effect of this. That's the effect of this. So when I talk about this bill particularly, sure, it's housing. It's exempting this one group for a very specific reason. But the overall picture here is a big deal. The overall picture here is that we are stifling citizens from talking to their elected leaders. That is the effect of what Democrats did in the election bill. But as soon as they discovered a group that they really like and want to support, they exempted them. They exempted them. Some are more equal than others. This is not okay. This is not okay. Citizens should have unlimited speech when they are talking to their elected officials. Unlimited speech. Lobbying means something. Lobbying means that you are being paid by an organization to advocate for or on behalf of, for or against an issue. And when we turn average citizens talking to their elected officials into lobbyists, we are chilling speech. We are chilling free speech. That's what was done in the elections bill. And now in this bill, we're starting the carve-outs for people we like. It's not okay, folks. It's not okay. Let's vote no.
I recognize the member from Sherburne, Representative Mecklin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Much of what I was going to say has been pretty well covered by many others.
and largely to Representative Greenman's Bill 4444, misclassification. I see she's not. Oh, there she is. And some of the other comments that I've heard as far as prevailing wage will not drive the cost of housing up. Representative Baker kind of touched on the cost of housing is already so high, and the resources not there, the lack of housing that's available currently in our state, the fact that the housing in our state costs so much more compared to the neighboring states. I wish Representative Joy was sitting here because he can tell you story after story about people who simply go across the border into North Dakota because it's so much less expensive. So we can debate all that stuff all we want, but here's simple stuff we can talk about. 2 or 3 years ago, wage theft. Then Rep. Mahoney said 99.9% of all the employers are doing the right thing. So for 0.1%, we passed all this sweeping paperwork and regulation. For 0.1%. We just heard Representative Greenman talk about the person that fell off the roof. Now, it's a horrible thing. I don't want to see it. I agree. Bad things happen to good people. But at the same time, we're going to go after all the good actors with all these sweeping new regulations and mandates for the few that do the wrong thing, because we're not going to go after the bad people. We kind of saw the same thing in the last couple of years with all the car theft, but what did our Attorney General do? He went after Kia and Hyundai because they made their cars too easy to steal, rather than going after the people stealing the cars. We see this repetitive behavior, and in fact, yesterday, we had a bill that gives an out if you were coerced or due to domestic violence to get out of the straw purchase penalties. But nothing in there said that you have 48 hours to report it should you be forced into that situation, like we do on the stolen gun bill we heard of last week or better. This will increase the cost of housing. It's not that hard to figure out. Last year we had the general contractor liability bill, which requires a whole lot of new regulation. Who's going to do all that paperwork? It's going to mean another admin. Anybody who's in business knows every time you hire somebody, that cost has to get passed on. We were already at a point where you needed probably 2 or 3 just to be a home builder. And just within last year and this year, we're probably adding 2 to 3 more, maybe 4. I know we have. So now we have to pass that cost on to the end user. And I've been trying to figure out last year in what'd you have? You had the widget bill for what I think we call it the Amazon bill, if I'm not mistaken. And excluded from that was organized labor, if I'm not mistaken. And we had Representative Wogemont had one for meat packing plants that was similar, and I believe it had an exemption in there. But nevertheless, I've been trying to figure out, will 44 benefit union labor? And will Representative Greenman yield for a question?
She will yield.
Representative Greenman, do you think that with all this new regulation that this in some way may benefit that of organized labor or union labor?
Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, or Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Mecklin. And just to clarify the warehouse worker safety bill, I'm not sure what you're talking about, but there were no carve-outs on that. Just for clarification, it was a year ago. The answer is this bill will benefit any businesses that are doing it the right way and following the law. We heard from a few small businesses about the issue that they had, which is making it pencil out. So when you're paying workers' comp and unemployment insurance and minimum wage and overtime pay, as you should do when you have employees and you're competing against folks who are not complying with the law, you can't make it pencil out. And so what this bill will do is ensure that the tools are in effect so that more people are complying with the law. You're deterring. And so the best way to do this is to ensure that people aren't doing it in the first place. So this will help all good employers who are actually following the law.
Representative Mecklin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, thank you for that, I guess. I've been trying to figure out, like, in what way, because I've read through it and it doesn't have any exemptions anywhere in there. But it will drive up the cost of housing because I do know union labor on projects does cost more at the end of the day. I've had many union contractors, especially in commercial, compare if they're non-union, what they could do a job for it compared to a union shop. And it's always a significant difference, particularly on school projects. And it's not always the same contract. I've done this for several years, and particularly when there's a referendum coming for something new in a school, and I'm asking myself, why are we paying 30% more when this contractor could do it for that much less, when it's our tax money? That for us in that community, if we could save money in these mandates where they have to use organized labor, it's mind-boggling to me. But at the end of the day, the cost of housing will go up. Right now, South Dakota has a beautiful plan where they will honor any professional license from any professional kind of trade here. I personally lost 4 of some of the darn best independent contractor plumbers in my own community because they went to South Dakota. They're making more money, they have less expense, the world is freer over there. I'm sure Representative Backer sees a lot of people going over to South Dakota. And you can say, you know, I've had friends going, I would really struggle giving up the lakes. I love fishing. Will Representative Backer yield to a question?
Representative Backer. He will yield.
Representative Backer, if you're in Sisseton, South Dakota, how far are you away from, say, Lake Traverse or Big Stone?
Representative Backer.
Good question. The closest lake would be Traverse because that Tip Elbow North is separated by Lake Traverse on the northern part, Big Stone Lake on the southern part. So you're about 11 miles from Sisseton to the South Dakota side of Lake Traverse. You're about 15 miles from the northern part of the head of Big Stone Lake. So not too terribly far. The amount of money that you would spend on gas going to those lakes is significantly less than the taxes that we have. It's kind of like Rocky again down here this afternoon getting just clobbered by the state of Minnesota. You don't get clobbered. Actually, South Dakota and North Dakota helps you. They lift you up instead of push your face into the mud. So thank you for asking.
Representative Mecklin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, I've actually fished Lake Traverse many times. If you get into the silver bass out there, man, it's like a lightning for 20, 30 minutes. Anyway, the point of this, housing will go up. There'll be less people willing to do it, or they will move to a simply much more compliant state. And to suggest that all the people are doing this wrong, I work in this industry. I work with these subcontractors. I am a subcontractor, particularly now. I don't have time to take on 30 or 90-day projects and be committed all the time with all the stuff that we do on this side of things. So I don't mind being a sub to somebody else. I pick my general contractors very carefully. But I started as an independent contractor and worked my way up. And no, I did not get taken advantage of out of unfair wages or having to pay my cost of doing business. Yes, I did pay my cost of doing business. It's called my tools, it's called my trucks, it's called my insurance, my fuel. It's part of running business. So I don't know. I've heard some very unfair descriptions of what us do in our industry. And we know that we have a significant shortage of housing. And I bless you for making it worse, because we're just going to simply, we make a percentage no matter what you do. You add more cost, we're simply going to go up. We'll build less houses a year because nobody can afford them. So I don't know how you think this is going to help the people going forward, but to me, this is going to cause a much worse effect on the housing market, on the labor market, and many other things. Not only that, but the number one thing we all hear, we can't find any help. So if we have to hire 5 new admins, we can't find them, how can we maintain being compliant short of working more hours? So you're basically forcing us into having to work more hours that we can't get paid for because we're being compliant with all the new regulations that you put on us. Seems kind of like funny to me. I know that all the folks here, Representative Baker has run business. I mean, all these folks. And we spend hours after hours. We go out, we work the day. I come home, I go meet the customer to figure out the bid. I come home, I do all the paperwork. I wake up with my face stuck to paper, planted there because I'm doing all this on myself. But that's how I ended up working my way to where I could hire people. And then you threw another 3 regulations at me, so I had to do it again anyway. I don't know. Folks, it's frustrating, but there you go. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Nadeau.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members. And I wasn't going to speak on this bill either, but I was going through this thing, and members, I always start by trying to find those things that are going to actually make an impact and do something good. it's hard to find in this bill. I'm sorry, Representative Greenman and Representative Hornstein. You know, this bill is full of technical advisory commissions. There's a technical advisory commission to provide recommendations on bills that we put in effect last year regarding carbon. We've got the Infrastructure Advisory Board, Transportation Impact Assessment Technical Advisory Committee. We've got study after study, the dynamic transportation options, metro mobility enhancement options, highway designation review committee, electric assisted bike youth operations study, wayside detectors, commercial driver workforce study, and hopefully those are all going to, you know, help us improve our infrastructure that, honestly, members, is already it's redundant. We've got cities, we've got counties, we've got regional planning associations that already collaborate on all these things. But I wasn't going to talk about that. I want to talk about broadband. In an earlier life, I had a small utility company that put in cable television and lines. And as I'm looking through this thing, members, what are we doing putting installation techniques on when an underground utility contractor is going to cross a telephone line? We're putting it in statute. How disrespectful can we possibly be? And I understand, members, that we're talking about, you know, making sure that we've got, you know, properly trained safety people out there. This is not the first time that we've started putting underground utilities in the ground. People have been doing it for decades, members, decades. They do it safely. They do it cost effectively. The more we get involved in business, the more costly it becomes, the more difficult it is, and the less people want to get involved in the industry. And I noted that Representative Greenman, who I really like, said she learned something in her first committee was that the job of the Labor Committee is to listen to workers. If that's the case, maybe we better figure out a committee on employers. We need, oh, wait, maybe that's the taxes committee. I'm not sure. Maybe that's just taxes. But there's that balance, members, that we have to find. Without employers, there's no employees. And we're doing everything in our power to get rid of the ability for some young, enterprising, hardworking entrepreneur to like take a risk and go out there and put coaxial cable in the ground. He's got to drive down to Trenchers Plus. He's got to buy a little cable puller. You know, he's going to go out there. He's going to work his tail off to get a contract with one of the cable companies. And what are we doing? We're saying, oh, geez, whoa, back up. There's some statutes that are required. There's some laws that we need to follow. This bill is full of, it's like a death of 1,000 cuts to business this session. I don't understand why every time we turn around, we're just making it harder and harder and harder for people to conduct business in the state of Minnesota. So, you know, I think everybody's mind is made up on how we're going to vote for this. But members, regardless of who is in charge of this chamber, moving forward, we need to do a much better job in the Labor Committee in balancing the needs of employees and the needs of employers, trying to find that mix. Because we pretty soon we just won't. We'll end up being a situation with our small businesses like we are with our healthcare industry, where everybody's, you know, nobody's making any money in order to basically survive. So members, vote no on this bill.
I recognize the member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Madam Speaker, members, first of all, I want to thank Representative Howard for this year having a very good committee. Overall, we worked well together. And I'd like to also thank Representative Hornstein for the way he did the conference committee this week. I listened to that, and I was appreciative of doing it the right way, having testimony, going through the bill side by side, figuring things out. So I appreciate the work done. It's the way it should be done. Now, with the housing portion of this trifecta of an omnibus bill, there's some good things in it. We're going to have reports on what the Minnesota Housing Finance does with their funds. Get a better idea of what's working, what's not working. What's going to new housing, what's going to rehab. What's going to apartment units provided by housing providers, provided by nonprofits, and also what's going to refurbish and help those who purchase their own home in a way where the funds go, which is a good thing. We also have a working group to try to figure out how to get emergency rental assistance out quicker, because it does take time. Let's talk about what's gone. One of the important things that's gone is this so-called payment discrimination, which actually increases rent in other places where they've done it. And I'd like to thank Senator Latz for his stand on that, because he must know how it works. Instead of using a hammer to force people to take and sign contracts with the federal government for the Housing Choice Voucher Program, maybe we should look at a carrot on a stick, an incentive for them. I think that'll work better. It might work out better where they'd actually find people willing to do the program for that incentive, and not instead of things that could actually increase the cost of rent. But I do have some concerns. We have an 80% increase in the debt limit for Minnesota Housing Finance, from $5 billion to $9 billion. That's a huge increase. And those are mostly backed up by our tax dollars and our taxpayers and the citizens of Minnesota. Then we have the bailout of Minneapolis because they failed to follow the law. Members, it's always been the policy of this body not to get involved in things until after lawsuits are settled. And now we're stepping into the middle one before it's settled in court. And then with the fix on it that's in the bill, it's good for Anoka, Carver, Dakota, Hennepin, Ramsey, Scott, and Washington counties only. Where the other 80 counties still have to follow the old law. They still have to do all the work. They still have to pay the extra expenses, while the cities in those 7 counties don't have to. It's really one Minnesota, metro versus outstate. Members, we also have some issues that the Representative Mecklin brought up. The prevailing wage. Earlier this year, I mentioned earlier, former member and now Mayor Dan Fabian was here talking about the issues because of prevailing wage. Where they're using money through Minnesota Housing Finance to build workforce housing, which is desperately needed in most of the outstate Minnesota. We have jobs. We have good paying jobs. We have highly technical jobs that we need filled. The problem is there's no place for them to move in for a short time till they can buy a home. If you ever bought a home, you know you can't buy it overnight. It can take months to get all the paperwork and everything taken care of. And if you own a home already, you usually have to sell that one before you can buy the new one. And with the prevailing wage, it does increase the cost 17 to 30%. And now, with the workforce, or Greater Minnesota Workforce Housing, we had to go to from a 25% match to a 50% match, because the cost to build those housing units is more than the value. If it's only valued at $200,000, but it costs you $250,000 to build it, who's going to build it? No one. And cities started a way, especially in Greater Minnesota, to help by using TIF districts in order to do it. And now this bill changes that. Also in this bill, there's nothing to really to lower the cost of housing. Not a lot. We've heard today talking about the difference between the cost to build a house in Minnesota compared to our surrounding states. It's hugely different. We had an opportunity to work on that this year, but unfortunately we did not. But overall, the housing bill is much better than it went into the conference committee. I wish I could actually vote for it. But the other things, because this was put into a monstrosity with other bills, I cannot. We have the one issue I talked about, increasing the costs and requiring the wage. But we also have the issue with the broadband. I have areas just in my district and also in Representative Scott's district in Anoka County that their only available internet is dial-up. And now we're going to delay any chance of getting them high-speed broadband. It's a year to year and a half delay if this goes in order to get installers trained and everything done. And if we don't have the broadband and the money from the federal government spent in time, we lose it. Members, vote no on this bill.
I recognize the member from Waseca, Representative Petersburg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate that. I'm going to spend most of my time talking on transportation, but I'm going to hit a couple of the other areas of the bill as well, things that I think haven't been said. So I'm going to talk about housing first. Lee Johnson talked about the $5 billion to $9 billion, the raising of the credit limit. And to keep it in perspective, what $4 billion will do. If you're talking about $400,000 homes, that's 10,000 homes. That's a bunch. And if you could think about how many you'd have to do in order to, in 10 years, how many you'd have to process, that's 10 a day of working days over 4 years in order to actually get all of those done. it's an extremely increase in expansiveness of it. And primarily in committee, in conference committee, what we heard the rationale for was, well, by the way, when it was here on the floor, it went from $5 billion to $7 billion, which is a 40% increase. Now it's going up to $9 billion, which is an 80% increase. And when asked why, they said, well, we figured in a little while we'll have to ask for more, and so this just saves having to come back for us. In essence, putting the credit limit on autopilot. And that's one of the pet peeves that I have in regards to the legislature is we oftentimes want to put things on autopilot so we don't have to keep discussing it, so we don't have to keep justifying it, so we don't have to keep determining whether or not it's the right thing. Well, that certainly is easier, but if you ask the average constituent that votes for each and every one of us, they'd say that's not really what we put you up in the legislature to do. We really want you to debate and verify because things change, et cetera. So I have a big concern that was put in, went from $5 billion to $9 billion, because it's our due diligence that we ought to really do. And a lot of things that we did in the housing bill, and I was also on the housing committee through this year and last year, was spend lots of money, providing lots more houses, but very little of what we did actually helped to reduce the cost of housing, to reduce the overburden, some regulations that have kept contractors and others from actually starting to build new homes. Depending on which agency or what industry you talk to, we're trying to figure out why it costs anywhere from $50,000 to $80,000 more to build a house here in Minnesota than it does just right across the river into Wisconsin. Those are things that we ought to be thinking about. We also ought to be thinking about how do we help individuals make sure that they're self-sufficient so that they can continue to stay productive and stay self-supporting as well. Those are just the things in housing. In regards to labor, I'm trying to think of the word, the person that helps employees get more money, get more benefits, more paid time off, increase their working climate. No, that's not union leaders. It's called the state legislature. Okay? We have now taken on the responsibility of that for every worker in the state. So when it comes to the University of Minnesota and wanting them to unionize, I'm not sure why they need to. I'm not sure why there needs to be any union out there, since the legislature has taken on the mandates of almost everything in regards to what normally employers and employees regulate. Not only number of hours that they can work, how much sick time they have, safe time, health care, wages, minimum wages. Almost everything now has been done through the legislature. It kind of eliminates the need for unions. And so I'm expecting that some may decide, hey, it's not worth me paying the dues. Well, those dues do help people get in the legislature that help give us more. So maybe we'll keep that on. I don't know. But anyway, that's a concern that I have in labor. Broadband was another issue that was brought up at the conference committee, and I specifically asked the chair on the Senate about this issue in broadband and the negotiations, and because she said there was peace in the valley. Well, I had just before the meeting had talked to the two primary contractors that did all the broadband, or most of the broadband throughout, and they said, we have no agreement. And she says, no, we have an agreement. Well, I wasn't going to, deny that what she said, but again, we're hearing over and over again, no, there's no agreement. They did get agreement in Greater Minnesota with the Rural Electric Association and a few other organizations that do utilities, but not broadband. And I think that's a very big mistake, and I think maybe she was misled, I'm not sure. But in either case, we don't have that agreement. And so we're going to be dealing with increased costs as well. Let's see. Safe and sick time. One of the things that I had brought up is that safe and sick time is a little bit different than just medical leave or dealing with sickness. And so I had asked for, could we at least, instead of waiting 3 days before the employer gets notice of what's going on, if the employee would just give information about what's going on, that they haven't just left employment, but they actually are coming back. No, that wasn't accepted. I also asked, well, could they give us at least some advance notice, even if it's 15 minutes or 20 minutes before they take off? No, that wasn't quite right either. Well, I would hate to be that patient in the operating room in which the nurse all of a sudden says, well, I have to leave. We really do need to have some circumstances in which there needs to be some time off. No, that wasn't available either. So I have some real concerns with that. All the other concerns have been talked about. The others, lead Joe McDonald talked about them as well. Then it gets to the point of the last day of conference committee, and the last page of all the things that were going to be added onto the bill were additions. And there were 7 of them that had never been in either one of the bills. Now, for those of you that are freshmen and not going through this, and for the public out there, I always thought when I first came into my office and came into this chamber, I thought conference committee, okay, that's pretty interesting. I know how to negotiate and join things together. And so I thought, okay, a bill in the Senate and a bill in the House. Things that are in one bill and may not be in the other, maybe that's okay. If it's not in either bill, I said, well, that's not going to come in. And I thought if it was in both bills, it would stay in. All of those are false. Okay? Things can come in that have never been heard in any one of those committees. Things that are in both bills could be thrown out. You just don't know, which really implies that either the 5 or the 3 people on each body that are in that committee actually are writing the bill, okay? And so we can argue about it here, but that's not the case. Well, there were 7 of those additions that came in, and one of them was Representative Chair Cagle, and I don't think she's here yet. So I don't want her to believe that I have any issue in regards to actually the Council on Infrastructure, because I don't know it. It never came before us other than before that. But here it was added to the bill. And so as I inquired about it, and she even said here on the floor today that so many agencies have their own capital asset management program that we thought it would make sense to kind of organize that together. You know, kind of like the IT department in which Minute decided to congregate everything else. Right, Representative Nash? How well that works, right? So the point is that it was brought up, and I reviewed exactly where the status was of that particular bill. Well, it had been in Ways and Means a couple of times, like the beginning of May, and it still hasn't come into the floor. And so I'm trying to figure out exactly why it came in. I don't know why it came in, other than maybe it was a favor, I don't know. But in either case, the infrastructure bill came before us. Now, yes, it's true that Department of Transportation has some infrastructure that we have to deal with, but as she said, capital assets management is across the board because it's more than just buildings too. It could be IT infrastructure, it could be all sorts of things. It really is appropriate to have been in the state gov bill instead of transportation. It just seems out of place. That was the one process thing that I thought was really odd, one that I thought really didn't fit with the normal process. I can't tell you because it hasn't been vetted enough to know whether that's a good program. I know that Representative Franson and Representative Gilman have concerns about it, but we really don't know. And so here it is in a transportation bill dealing with infrastructure from across the entire agencies of Minnesota. All right, so let's get on to transportation. Here, I want to talk first a little bit to Representative Chair Hornstein, who I have had great respect for and have worked with him for all 12 years that I've been here. And Representative Hornstein, I will tell you that when
the transportation bill got put in with housing and labor, I thought the transportation bill was probably like, if I was going to grade it, maybe a D, okay? I thought there were some really things in there that needed to be done. As we started conference committee, I talked to you and gave you some ideas, and I really think that coming out of conference committee, it probably turned into like a C or C+. And if it was standalone, I would have voted for it. I mean, seriously, it's had some issues that I still think was right, but we can't expect to get everything we want. But we are where we're at. And so some of the things that I found of concern in the transportation bill, one is the speed cameras. It's a 4-year pilot, and they're going to allow Minneapolis and Mendota to put 1 camera for every 10,000 people, which is about 42 cameras or more throughout that time. I'm not sure that we really need that many in order to really determine whether a pilot is successful or not, or where it goes from there. I also thought that maybe it needs to be more than 20 miles an hour, maybe 25 or 30 miles an hour, but in either case, that was a concern for me. The other pet peeve that I've had, and I shared that earlier before we got into the concurrence, is I have been around in which we have had struggles trying to find enough dollars for the trunk highways for all of our programs, for all of the construction projects and so forth. And now that we have more money coming in, we've got tax increase coming in, we got license tap fees, everything else coming in which we're going to have a lot more money coming in. All of a sudden, we made a mistake, and this bill is one of them, that think that we have, okay, now we got this extra money, we can start spending it. No, that's just trying to catch us caught up with what the needs for the roads and bridges. So we have a couple of different areas in the bill in which we take trunk highway funds away from trunk highway projects and put it into other things that I find questionable on whether or not it actually is. Some are valid and some aren't. The $1 million to plant trees is one of those. It will look pretty. It will capture carbon. All those are positive. But is it really what people are expecting their gasoline tax dollars and other dollars to go to? I don't know. That's a concern of mine. Greenhouse gases is another one. And Representative Kraft and I debate this all the time. I don't disagree that we shouldn't do whatever we can for greenhouse gases. My concern is that I believe, the way it's written, that the greenhouse gas mitigation trumps all other aspects. Until you find out how to mitigate greenhouse gases, we can't take care of safety issues or any other issues that might be of importance today, rather than that. Now, he disagrees with me, and he and I have had some debates about that because he's a very good optimist, at least in that regard, not about the climate, but he's an optimist about the fact that everything can be mitigated so that we can do both. We can have safety and we can mitigate. And I'll give you an example of why there are always going to be situations where that doesn't work. Anybody here believe that every bill off this floor can come by partisanship? No, it can't. There are always going to be situations where you're going to have to make that decision. My concern is that I would hate to have to tell a family member who died in an intersection that we knew was unsafe, but we weren't quite able to mitigate all of the greenhouse gases for it, and one of their family members died. I don't think that's right. So I think we need to continually do whatever we can for mitigating greenhouse gases and all of that, and take care of safety. And I know that there's a big sense of urgency that we need to do this because of climate change and others. But the other day, they were talking about the DNR. I went to their website because I asked, how many 100-degree days have we had? And lo and behold, I found out that in 1936, there were 9 100-degree days, 1 year alone. And then I looked currently to see what is going on. In the last 10 years, you know how many we've had? Not 10, not 5, not 3, but only 2 100-degree days in the last 10 years. And I'm guessing that's the reason why we no longer talk about global warming instead about climate change. And I don't mean to belittle that. I think we need to always do whatever we can, but let's keep it in perspective. And that's the perspective that I have. A couple other things that I have here. Originally, the mutual target was $2 million. When we got the conference report, it was $4 million through a joint agreement. So we got an extra $2 million to do. A couple other things that I have concerns with. I'm always been concerned about micromanaging. That means micromanaging people and their personal stuff and micromanaging businesses. And we had a lot of that micromanaging of railroads. Some of it was taken out, and I thank the chair for doing that. But we still have a couple things in here in regards to insurance for moving crews around and wayside detectors that are going to be there. Those are something that we can work with, and that's fine. But we have to be careful not to go too far in regards to that. First of all, the original request was go to $5 million worth of liability insurance, which wasn't even available. So I think that makes sense that we did what we did. The Minnesota Advisory Council, I did talk that about already. We have $1 million going to Ramsey County. Anybody have an idea what that's for? Well, we have the second train to Chicago coming into St. Paul Depot. We also have the Green Line going there. That was to help them with increases in their liability insurance for the county. And it's a one-time thing, and it's nice that we helped them out. But again, it's more dollars that we're spending for it as well. I don't know how many of you remember that last year we put together a task force looking into the governance of the Met Council, but we did. And they worked all summer, tens of meetings, and we're supposed to come back with a report. We never saw it because it's not done. So one of the things in this bill is it requires the Met Council to review all aspects of construction with the Department of Transportation, in which the Met Council will pay all the expense and the Department of Transportation will give them guidance. Now, the Met Council doesn't have to follow it, but they're kind of highly expected to. Anybody think that's going to be less costly or more costly? I think it's going to be more costly. It may get us better supervision. That's hard to tell. But it's going to have to come out of the Met Council's budget, which means that it's going to be more costly because there's going to be two groups looking at it, and every project that they do is going to be higher and increase the cost. So we also put in $10 million, in which we actually took away from the general funding for light rail for the Blue Line, and put it into a program for, what do they call it? Anti-displacement for, anti-displacement for community along the Blue Line. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I'm guessing it means that when people have to move, whenever they get it built, that it will go into a fund to help them move out. We don't even know if the Blue Line's going to get done yet, or what it's actually going to get programs. So, the last few things that I would like to just say is that we have the other program that I want to talk about, which was a pilot program in Hennepin County that gave, when you got a fix-it ticket or a ticket in which a taillight went out, you're actually given dollars to actually pay for it. So the police officer would stop you and say, oh, by the way, your taillight's out. Here's up to $250 to fix it. And then it goes. That was given as a bequest by somebody, and that money has run out, and so now we're going to pay for that new program to the tune of $1.2 million. Now, there are a few things that I think are good in this bill. that we did add. One was the $22.5 million for the $22.5 million for the State Patrol building. That's something that Colonel Langer and others have asked for many years. It's time for us to get that. We also put in money for additional exam stations so that we can finally maybe get caught up with driver's exams so people don't have to wait weeks and times and probably drive 2 hours in order to get it done. And it also requires counties and Met Council to report on the revenues that they have gotten from the extra sales tax that has gone into place. Those are all positive things. And so with that, Mr. Chair, I'm going to be requesting a no vote because of a lot of the things in the labor bill and the House bill. Even though your bill is much better, it just doesn't quite make it over the top for the other. But I do appreciate our working together, our time together, and this will be the last time you and I get to debate a conference committee report. But I have appreciated the respect that you and I have shared, and I know that I have swayed you sometimes, and you've swayed me sometimes, and so that's a sign of mutual respect. So thank you.
I recognize the member from Stearns, Representative Damath.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And members, as we have heard the debate today over this omnibus bill, the conference committee report for transportation, housing, and labor, everything has been put together. And I just want to point out, as you have heard, there are some helpful and some things that are good in this bill, and there's been a lot of hard work put into this effort. Just because things are labor intensive and it takes a lot of work doesn't mean that all of the provisions are necessarily good. And I want to just point out some of the things. So when you choose your vote, you are choosing your vote based on some of the things that I actually look at as most concerning when we go back and we talk to our constituents and we are held accountable for the decisions that are made in this place. In the transportation portion of the bill, it does prioritize greenhouse gases over road safety, and it prioritizes planting trees over actually fixing our potholes across the state. And I have to question whether or not that is best use of taxpayer dollars. It doubles down on the Democrats' spending spree by canceling money that was already spent last year, only then this year to turn around and spend it again. In the Housing Finance Authority portion, in this bill, currently the Housing Finance Authority has about $5 billion, a limit there. This bill increases what could be spent up to $9 billion. That's an 80% increase. And what it doesn't do, though, it doesn't increase our housing supply, and it does not do anything to make housing and building a home or having a home more affordable. So we've got an agency that is having their ability to spend increased by 80%. In the labor section of the bill, this bill increases penalties for job creators, no matter the size or the number of employees that they have. The penalty would be for a mistake that could be made, an honest mistake. A punishment or a penalty rather than working with our job creators to correct an honest mistake. So overall, members, as you get ready to take this vote, make sure you remember that this bill spends money that we do not have for projects that we do not need instead of prioritizing the actual problems that are facing our state. The bill spends more money to grow government, and that is after Democrats in the state of Minnesota spent $18 billion of surplus and doubled down and chose to increase the state budget by another $10 billion. This bill will add to our looming deficit. It creates another layer of bureaucracy, and it makes it harder and more expensive for Minnesotans to afford their lives. Members, vote no on this irresponsible and unaffordable bill.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Howard.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members, for the debate. I want to close by hitting a few thank yous that I missed. I want to thank Lee Johnson I believe we did run a great committee these last 2 years and work well together, and I want to thank you and your members. And I want to thank Representative Petersburg, who we got to serve on this conference committee, but he's also been on housing. I've enjoyed immensely serving with Representative Petersburg. You always ask the best questions, and we're going to miss you on the housing committee. I just wanted to highlight a few things that came up during the debate. There was talk about the debt capacity at MHFA, and I want to be clear, MHFA is largely a bank, and they use this debt capacity to finance single-family homes from Minnesotans, especially Minnesotans that are buying a home for the first time. I know that's a value we share, and that is something that we're going to see more of as a result of this bill. We've also heard a lot of talk about the need to increase the supply of housing, and I could not agree more. The $50 million in housing infrastructure bonds in this bill will help us build more homes, both to rent and to own. And I absolutely look forward to working in a bipartisan fashion on more work that we need to do in this body to increase the supply of housing policy that we began the conversation this year, and we absolutely need to continue that conversation in the months and years to come. Members, I think a lot of us work and care about housing because we understand that home is at the center of everything in our lives. Whether we're talking about families having the economic stability to thrive, reducing racial gaps in our schools, making sure that communities are economically strong, all roads lead back to home. And now we have a housing bill that actually includes funding for those same roads. And so it's a joy to author this bill and to work with all of you on this issue, this bill over the last year and change. And I would encourage a yes vote. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Again, I want to thank Representative McDonald, the lead on our committee. He helped us keep running run a good committee and keep us on track. Members, there's been a lot of discussion before when this bill was originally up. There's been a lot of discussion today on some of those same issues, so we're not going to relitigate all that. This is a good bill. It's good for the working people in the state. It's good for the employers that play by the rules and are having to compete against companies that cheat their employees out of their wages. This is a good bill, members. Vote green.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, members, for a good debate. Appreciate Representative Petersburg's kind words. And at the end of the day, he gave me a very slightly above average grade. So that's important because, you know, Professor Petersburg grades on the curve. So I'm pretty excited by that. Thank you. I appreciate that. Members, I often quote at the end of a transportation bill from my transportation mentor, Bernie Leader, who would like this bill because it covers all modes and all parts of the state. But today I'm going to quote from my political mentor, the late Senator Paul Wellstone, who really got me interested and got me into politics. And he used to say that politics at its core is about improving people's lives. And so here are some ways in which the transportation section of this bill improves people's lives. We hire 32 more driver examiners. So that backlog that some of your constituents are experiencing when they want to take a driver's test, I think this will go a long way in alleviating that backlog. 32 new testers in this bill. We have almost $11.5 million in this bill to address the problems of small cities, those cities under 5,000 that don't have a dedicated source of funding, but beginning the year after next will have a dedicated source of funding, which will grow over the years. That's what we did in our transportation bill last year. But this year, they needed that money, and they've got it in this bill, $11.5 million. In several different ways, we address the nexus between climate change and transportation. As I mentioned before, this is critical because transportation is the #1 source of greenhouse gas emissions in Minnesota. We improve people's lives by addressing the issue of ADA accessibility when it comes to boarding and off-boarding these increasingly popular bus rapid transit systems that we're building in metro areas around, not just the metro area here, but around the state. This is the future of one of the most important parts of our future transportation system. We're making it more ADA accessible in this bill. We improve people's lives by making major investments in the state road construction program and the Corridors of Commerce program. And that will be helpful to businesses and residents throughout the state. And then finally, we have several provisions that will not only improve people's lives, but will save people's lives, because we have an epidemic of speeding in the state right now, particularly during and post-COVID. That has continued. We have 3 or 4 different provisions in this bill that will address speeding issues, and I'm very proud of that. That will improve and save people's lives. So members, I'm proud of the transportation provisions in this bill, as well as labor and housing, and I ask for your support.
Representative Long.
Madam Speaker, I move that the conference report on House File number 5242 be laid on the table.
Representative Long moves to table House File 5242. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. The motion prevails. Representative Long.
Madam Speaker, I move a recess to the call of the Speaker until approximately 6:15, and I'm happy to engage in a colloquy.
Representative Damath.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would the Majority Leader yield for a couple of questions?
He will yield. Representative Damath.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Majority Leader Long, is there any insight that you could provide as far as the status of the other body and when they might be taking up some of the good work that we've done in this body?
Representative Long.
The other body is and always will remain a mystery to me.
Representative Damath.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Majority Leader Long, I think that sentiment today is shared by a number of people across our state and in this place. But I want to point out, and then I will have a follow-up question, that right now with the work that we have done in this place today, vetting and debating the bills at hand, we have done that for less time than the other body has actually been in recess. So when there's questions to whether or not we are getting our work done here, I believe here in the House we are getting that work done, but yet it is being delayed for whatever reason, someplace that we can't explain. One last question is, when we return at 6:15, do you know what order we will be on and what we'll be taking up from there?
Representative Long.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you. The current plan is that we will take up the HHR bill and then ERA.
Representative Damath.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Majority Leader Long.
The motion on the table is for the House to stand in recess until approximately 6:15. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed, nay. And the motion prevails.